Hi everyone. Well, it's time for an update on the Rancho Palos Verdes landslide. I've got a lot of new information, so let's get going on it. Here's a geologic map showing the landslide areas. The larger area to the top is the ancient landslide complex, which they discovered only recently reactivated. And then you have these other slide areas closer to the coast, Abalone Cove, and then the Portuguese Bend landslide, and then off to the east here, Klondike Canyon landslide. This is a recent image from the consultant involved with studying this landslide and recommending solutions. The red area shows areas of higher rates of movement for the landslide. And as we discussed in previous videos, there's been a widespread voluntary evacuation, although many of these people have had their utilities, electrical and gas shut off. So many people are basically camping at their property. They still have sewer, but it's not a good situation for many of these residents. So this is another view of these various districts associated with Rancho Palos Verdes. And again, another image of the rate of movement. The darker color indicates higher rates of movement, but there's an area of sliding that really hasn't been addressed with this image. And Value Space has generated a data set and done analysis for this area that I'm going to share with you the results in this video. So again, I want to thank them for their contribution to this video. I have a link in the description if you want to learn more about their company. But they obtain InSAR data, so it's satellite-based radar data. They use these European Space Agency satellites, Sentinels 1 and 2, that have a large radar array that blankets the Earth in a given swath, and with the continued flights, they are able to get coverage over the whole globe. And what they're looking for with this radar signal is shifts in the wavelength, and the wavelength of a radar signal that they're using here is 5.6 centimeters, so a little over 2 inches. Resolution can be down to the millimeter, but the movement needs to be under about 2.7 centimeters or a little over an inch between 12-day overflights. Otherwise, you can't differentiate if it's an inch and a quarter of movement or 2 inches and a quarter of movement, and so on. And these satellites have a polar route. So Value Space generated this image. These are the data points that they used in the analysis. And green is more or less nominal or average values, not showing a lot of movement. The red areas are the zones that show more movement, relatively speaking. Just another view of this. Now, one aspect of this is that this landslide is moving so quickly that they can't really get absolute values for change in elevation across this site. But again, you get a very good relative indication as to what's going on. And I think this technology would have additional value in monitoring other areas that up till now haven't moved to detect early signs of movement or incipient movement, to alert them to perhaps a bigger situation brewing that they may not have previously been aware of. So I was able to export those data points using their software to Google Maps. And it's kind of interesting if you look at the distribution of the red dots, so the areas of higher relative movement. What I did was I took this district map and I superimposed this Google map with the InSAR data points. You can see quite a good correlation. And I've done the same thing to this landslide area map. So again, the darker zones correspond to these areas of the Portuguese Bend landslide and Klondike Canyon landslide. Blue indicates uplift. Now there's some gaps in the data because the movement was so great that the system basically turns those points off. So what has the city of Rancho Palos Verdes and the residents been doing? A lot of people have complained that live in the area, and it's largely a retirement area from what I understand. They have complained about the lack of help. You know, you've got people with utilities that are out, just don't know exactly if additional properties are going to have their power and gas shut off, if some of these properties are going to be just outright condemned. So the city is marshaling resources, and they're looking to give each resident a grant of $10,000, or rather each property owner. So I suppose that could go to defray costs if they're having to spend time in a hotel or just have extraordinary expenses given their situation. I don't think it's going to go very far to remediating or stabilizing any part of their properties. But in the month of September, the city and their consultants and contractors have completed 6 dewatering wells. And this headline shows landslide area at 200 gallons per minute of water extraction. There was a city council meeting earlier this week. I'm recording this video on Thursday, October 3rd. So there was a city council meeting on Tuesday, and they indicated that there were flow rates combined among the 6 wells of about 600 gallons per minute. So roughly 100 gallons per minute per well. So let's look at this video. You can see Malcolm, California-based drill shaft contractor. They're able to drill water wells as well. They're out there installing these well points. And these well points extend to different target locations to extract water from these bentonite zones in particular. And these wells are all located at the toe of the slope. So the idea there is that you increase the resistance to sliding at the base of the slope. Now, ideally, they would put together some system of wells further upslope so that they could actually intercept that water before it goes clear down to the toe. But this is a good start. And so far, they spent millions of dollars doing that just this year alone. So talk about, from the city council meeting, maintaining current deep dewatering program. That's $1 million for 3 months of operation. Expand the dewatering well program. That's another $4 million. Expand the dewatering well area. That's another $7 million. And another $3 million for another area. So you're talking millions of dollars. But according to the city geologist, he's a private consultant, but he works in capacity of city geologist, reported that the rates of slope movement have decreased dramatically with the bringing online of these dewatering wells. But also keep in mind, there hasn't been any rain in the area for over 5 months. Here's a graph showing the change in rate of movement. And you can see as they brought these dewatering wells online, the rate of movement has decreased rather dramatically. But again, it's hard to differentiate how much of this is due to seasonal influences. So right now we're talking about a city that has an annual budget of around $40 million, and they're looking to spend probably $24 million this year alone. So the bulk of that money is coming from a surplus that took 15 to 20 years, from what I understand, to accrue. So they're spending money that they're not going to get back anytime soon. And as a result, they're anticipating a funding gap of over $26 million, and that's for the next fiscal year. So they're spending tens of millions of dollars trying to stabilize this landslide. And it turns out, until recently, they've gone without much subsurface data. So I'm going to play an excerpt from the city council meeting where the city geologist is addressing this point.
The city didn't have really any means of measuring groundwater levels for quite some time. No borings had been drilled in the landslide since around the year 2000, and so there were no monitoring wells. What we have in the ground now, we can actually monitor and see, okay, let's say we get a freak storm that comes in first week in November and drops 2-3 inches of rain. We'll be able to watch the piezometers and see, okay, how much lag time is there before that shows up while we're pumping? Right. So that's sort of a calibration that needs to happen over time, and you can calculate it, but with some empirical data, it would be even better.
So later on in this council meeting, they mentioned that they only discovered the deeper landslide this past June, and the deeper landslide is a game changer. It involves a much larger area. It's much deeper, so it's harder to address with monitoring wells. And by the way, these monitoring wells are 4-inch risers in a 9-inch diameter hole. And that over time, with additional slope movement, these risers get broken off, get sheared off. And so these wells only have a limited lifespan before they have to be abandoned or drilled out and replaced. So we're looking at the plot of the cross section of this slide area. It's about a mile wide and a mile long. And this deeper slide, the blue area, is over 300 feet in depth. The shallower slide, which they've been living with for many, many decades, is half that depth, about 160 feet. So for this next point, they mentioned that they finally got some data. They've got monitoring wells, they've got piezometers, which is a hole that's got a case section of pipe with a solid section of pipe as a riser, and they're able to monitor what the change in elevation of the water level is within the slope. So it's those pore pressures, or the head, so whatever level your water surface is, down to the bottom zone that you're monitoring, that value represents the amount of pressure that exists in that zone that's screened within the piezometer. But again, this data that they've obtained has been relatively recent, and the geologist here acknowledges that he wants way more data, but that he understands that they have a very limited budget to collect such data.
If I had my druthers, I would be drilling and modeling the entire landslide. But right now we're going to be judicious and figure out where are the best places to do that with what we have. And so we have discussed a couple of key locations that we think would be fruitful. And, my wish list is much longer than that, but that's for the future.
So the thing that concerns me is that, yes, it could be reasonable when you have thousands of people clamoring for something to be done by the city. And keep in mind, the city was sued and lost and had to permit development of some additional lots over the years. But the city derives the bulk of their revenue each year from property taxes of these neighborhoods. So here you have the city of Rancho Palos Verdes spending tens of millions of dollars in this year alone with no end in sight, because they'll have to replace these pumping wells, these dewatering wells over time. They'll have to add new wells. They have additional investigations to do. And I haven't heard much of any discussion about the probability of success and what is the current pumping scheme based on in terms of rainfall totals and infiltration amounts. They don't have a handle on that, surprisingly. So the closest I've heard about a discussion on this point came from a question at the city council meeting on Tuesday by the mayor pro tem.
Let's see if I can ask this question the right way, but I'm thinking ahead. Can you take the projected rainfall in the next several months and then relate it to the volume of removal that we're doing today and kind of, calibrate that to the amount of volume of water we need to remove, anticipating the rains ahead?
So are you talking about, looking at future rainfall or?
Future rainfall, as we look ahead to the winter and you look at the projected rainfall and the amount of water we're moving now, how much do we need to ramp up? I'm just curious, and it's okay if we get to that later in the agenda, but that's, I think, one of the considerations for us.
I think that's a good analysis to do, and I think that's an analysis that GLA would certainly be able to do as part of their, I don't know if that's in their scope, but it probably should be in order to answer that question. I think it can be done. I mean, the pie in the sky question is how much is it going to rain, but you can make some educated guesses and figure out how much water is getting into the landslide, by direct rainfall and by runoff in the canyons.
So again, that's rather surprising to me. I mean, I would have thought there at least would have been an assessment of how much pumping capacity would be needed during a normal rainfall season. And that question hasn't apparently been addressed at all, let alone what would happen if they have an extraordinary amount of rainfall like they've had the last couple of years. So there was a lot of animated discussions in the comments to these previous videos I've done on Rancho Palos Verdes, and a number of people said, they feel for the property owners, some not so much, but basically said, hey, you knew what you were getting into, and you decided to live here or build here anyway, and now you want government dollars to make it right. So you can continue to live in this area has ongoing landslides for decades and now has a much higher rate of movement over a larger area because of reactivation of the ancient landslide. So at this point, I would question the sustainability of what they're doing. So clearly the city isn't going to be able to continue spending tens of millions of dollars that they really don't have unless they get a massive infusion from the county, the state, or from federal sources. And I don't necessarily know that's going to happen. They have an expectation. There was a comment by one of the council members that, hey, LA County has a budget of $45 billion. They're going to give us $5 million to help out. It's a drop, thank you, but it's a drop in the bucket. I mean, do they expect the county to shoulder the burden of paying for all this? I think it's an open question. So to address the mindset, I think many people there have grown accustomed over the decades of dealing with this situation, having jacks placed under their homes so they can re-level their home periodically, having extensive regrading work done in the area, living with above ground sewer lines and periodic utility outages. But that was during the time when the only action was with the shallower landslide. They don't have much of any track record of dealing with this much larger Altamira, the ancient landslide. And I don't understand why they're not really assessing the big picture here. I understand they still have somewhat limited data, but I think it's the responsibility here of the city government, if they're the ones asking for all this money, to really lay it out there. Are they giving people false hope? If they get this extra money, is it going to lead to a viable long-term solution? Is that solution vulnerable to above average years of rainfall? I think these questions are imperative to be answered. Let's go to the letters to the editor for the Los Angeles Times. This was written by a Rancho Palos Verdes resident, Madeline McJones. And she says here, homes here can and have been reclaimed after being red tagged. We defied Mother Nature before, but we hardly get media coverage for that. If you have the grit, this is an excellent, manageable place to live with other can-do people. We have proved this for 60 plus years. But can you call yourself a can-do person if you're expecting various levels of government to keep ponying up tens of millions of dollars every year? And this goes to the second quote by David Ray in this editorial. Every affected homeowner likely knew the hazards when they bought their homes. Now cut off from utilities while nature destroys their neighborhood, they call upon government for impossible assistance. Their plight is not unlike that of residents who move to known fire-prone areas only to be burned out. Whether subject to wildfire, flood, or landslide risk, some homes should never have been built and should not be rebuilt. I think that's a rather prevailing sentiment out there right now. So again, I, in a previous video, suggested that the city retain an independent consultant who hasn't been involved with assessing this landslide or in any way involved with this whole issue to look at independently what's been done, what data is available, and come up with an assessment as to the viability of this whole approach. Or if it's just completely unsustainable and it's a conceit that people can expect to arrest this landslide, particularly the larger ancient landslide, to any significant degree. Well, I want to send a shout out to the channel members. I really appreciate your ongoing support. I also appreciate the support of those of you who have provided super thanks. That's another great way to support the channel. I'm going to roll credits at the end. Again, I'd like to thank Value Space. I think it's a phenomenal service, and I believe that the city should be utilizing this technology to get an early warning of potential movements for new landslide areas. And it just supplements their existing GPS data, which is much more limited. And I think you could give them a much more comprehensive ability to evaluate what's going on in this area. Thanks very much, everyone.